Hey everybody, it is Alec and Robert again with Royals and Rogues to talk about Tycho Decay, the horror short film. This is going to be our 14th meetup, and we're going to be going over the lab exterior and kind of the details that you had put in from last time that we'd went over. So I think you have it's showing up for me. I don't know if it's actually showing already.
Yeah. So I
And
have us on screen for the audience. That we have like a little pop-up window, but I don't think you see the pop-up window, I believe. So I'll shrink
no,
us
yeah,
down.
that's totally
So
fine. I
yeah.
will say though, I think you're wrong about the live. I think I started talking too much. So this
Did
is our
you?
14th one,
Oh, okay.
and but yeah, I just from okay now I'm seeing it too. It looks good. I like it. I'm glad you kept the I don't know the straps on the tower. What do we call what we're calling that?
I don't know, yeah, cables or whatever. So support
Cables. So we're good with
cables.
that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we still have that on the tower. There's a bunch of stuff I'm gonna change about this. We're sort of mid production on this one, but we added a ton of trees to the sides and stuff, so it's a lot less barren. You can see the pebbles leading up to the sort of muddy dirt road leading up to the research center. I think I'm gonna still darken a lot of this. It's like way too bright. We've added some smoke, some destruction. These are like obviously way too thick and stuff, like, just so it's art direction stuff. But in general, it's coming together pretty well, I think. So there's a bunch of like little things to just tweak over time, some framing stuff. Um, but I think it's generally getting the idea across. I really like having this little foreground light element, which is like, it's such a fake. What's so funny is so hypothetically, right, this is being cast from the doorway here,
Hmm.
but I'm not sure if there's any of these shadings settings will show me the lighting. Really, I guess that was one of these sort of the best. Quick shading, no. um but yeah, so supposedly this this little door light, which is above the door in this image here, can I do that? There we go. Is like casting all this light, but really I just have a light in front of the door facing outward, just like shining directly out. So it's like
Oh, really?
yeah, it's like, so what we want to have in film, right, is called motivated lighting, right? So like, while this light would never cast this sort of a this far away from the source, because it would have to be so darn, this would all be blown out, right, if that was that bright. However,
Yeah.
because it's but because our eye sees a light there, we're like, oh, that makes sense. That's logical, right? Like, I could see that casting that. And so you see that happen all the time in filmmaking, where there'll be like a tiny little lamp and um lighting, where it'll be like a tiny little lamp, but it'll be like lighting a whole room, and you're like, that's clearly not how that works. But we'll buy it because uh our eye can see that there is like a source there somewhere. And so there's all sorts of examples of this. Um, but like, this is a good one, right? You have all these like little overhead lights, and it's like, oh, that's clearly causing, all that. And it's like, no, that would never actually cast that much. Like, if you ever sat next to a lamp like this, it doesn't cause all the lights that you want it to like cast. But it's just an excuse, more or less, to have the lighting that you claim to have. So long as you have something in there as an excuse, and it sort of goes back to like CG in general, frankly, like, have a practical thing that the actor interacts with the first time you see, like Grogu or the T Rex or whatever. Like, have one moment where they're actually touching a real prop, and then from the rest of that time on, you can have it be CG.
Hmm.
And that's sort of the case with like Top Gun, why everyone thought it was like, oh, there's no VFX. It's like, well, yeah, like, yeah, they're in a cockpit, but like, that's just one very small part. All the planes, all the explosions, all the dogfights, those are all CG. But because you see like an actor in an actual cockpit at some point, you get this like grounding of believability that then can be spread the to everything else that you do, and it's sort of like you get like this goodwill because of that. So I'm gonna put this over here for a second while I show stuff. So that's what we're doing a lot of in this scene. We're gonna be faking moonlight. We're gonna be faking a bunch of other lights, and I'm trying to think more in like a, how would I do this as a filmmaker, right? sort of way. So this would be hard to do because
Yeah.
the light is literally like in the frame. But what you would do is you could just have something above here shining down, and you're using that as like the excuse, which all the time, like all the time. So, yep, that's more or less it. I'm not sure why this is so bright. My guess is I think it's this fire is somehow reaching over there, and I need to stop that. So what we would do is in film world is put up a flag, and you could do that in CG too. There's so many CG artists that like because they never did like practical filmmaking,
Hmm.
they don't think in that way, and I get it. It's very easy to not think in that way, but I think it's a good idea to like study a lot of traditional filmmaking. And this is one of the things my good friend Adam Spizak does all the time. We have some interviews with him on the channel, but he throws up film light flag. He throws up flags just to block stuff, and all it is a black thing you put into a C stand. I happen to have a C stand right here, so you
Yeah.
just put it in there, and you block a light.
Now I'm assuming though that if you're blocking it in that scene, are you like making it invisible? You're just putting it there,
So
or like what do you?
that's the cool part about CG is we're able to do all this stuff where normally you'd have to find a clever way to hide these things.
Mhm.
We can just make it not seen by the camera. So rather than having to raise it out of frame or do something else, what I could
Yeah.
literally do is just, and hope this doesn't crash anything, but we'll try it here. What I can do is shrink us down again, boop, and grab a turn off. Okay, I already have that off. Let's see. That's where that explosion is. So we can do a solid object like a plane. I can move it up here, scale it up, rotate it where I want it to go here to block off all that. And then all I have to simply do is make it grab a tag, under tags, redshift object, override, primary ray. Oh, you know what else I can probably, I think maybe there's a compositing tag. Let's see, render tag. Let's see, display, fine, and then we grab one more tag. Render tag, and then do, it's not Cineware. I believe there should be maybe they got rid of the compositing tag. Let's see, hello, comp, render tags. Oh, it's not there. Maybe it's just the redshift tag now. But I should be able to make it. I believe if I turn the visibility down, that's changing it everywhere. Forgive me, experts here. We're seen by camera. Visual reflection.
At least you're not doing it while you're rendering it.
Cast shadow. Okay, primary ray. There we go. I do want it to cast shadows. That's all. Just cast shadows is fine. All right. Now let me see at here if it shows up. This will be better than IPR, but it's going to be slower at first. So we'll see what happens. I have a bunch of things going on at the same time, so we'll see if this ends up turning on or not. I should probably well, I can't disable this.
I was gonna say, so the interesting thing too is it is funny that you're mentioning the light in the doorway, have you have the light just going straight out, because I was gonna make and point out that that's kind of like putting lights in your helmet.
Yeah, the doorway makes more sense.
I knew that would just get to you.
We do have doorway lights. Like in real life right now, your doorway has a light outside it to light up the door, right? Like you have a front porch light.
Yeah, the front of the house. Yeah, that's
you're
true.
gonna
That's
have,
true.
or even just right by the door. There's usually a couple lights, or there's like a little thing above the doorway if you're in like a fancier home. This should be calculating, but I don't know if it is. Might have crashed everything. We'll see. Hopefully the stream stays up.
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
It's a pretty complicated scene. I probably should have knocked some. Oh, there it goes. Okay. It's like, give me that GPU memory. Let's see, rendering. It's thinking about it. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool.
There we go.
Yep. And now we've turned off that light there. So you can kind of see.
That is.
That's the red is all gone away.
Yeah, you can already tell.
Yep. And we can't see that flag. So
That is fascinating. Although, yeah,
Where is
that's
it?
interesting because
Play.
yeah, in a practical
So
way,
I'm gonna
what you would
move
do
it
is you would
here.
hide it behind the tower, and that's
So
what you would.
yeah, yep. So I just moved it up, and it's gonna be really low, but you kind of see like it get brighter or darker based on me moving it.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, this isn't going to render super fast just because of how complicated it is right now, and it's mostly what's probably mostly causing the problems are these two plumes of smoke, but that's also what's causing the light. So normally I just disable those while I showed this, but seeing as that's also casting all the light, it's going to be a problem if I
Yeah.
just turn them off, because then there'll be no light. So
Now, is the fact that you're moving the flag around right now and making it bigger or smaller also slowing it down?
oh yeah, that's going to restart the.
Okay, that's what I also I was like, interesting.
It's going to restart every time I do that, but I'm just trying to show the difference more
Yeah.
um, there. So I'm going to stop that. Uh, and eventually, and there might be some better there's a real-time renderer in Redshift and like a what we would call like online versus offline rendering, but more or less what it just means is like if you're trying to render something in real time or if you're trying to let it take its time to render and then you get the finished result. But my dream is to have everything be real time, which that actually segues us nicely, unless you have any other questions about this scene.
No, not at all. It's looking
Okay.
good. I like it.
I do too. It needs a lot of work, but that's just it's like 80%, and that last 20% takes you. It's all the polish, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna close this so it stops taking up all my memory. I won't save anything. And then what I do want to talk about is a little bit of GeoGen. So this is an technically beta program by Jenga Effects, who also do EmberGen, and I've been
And are
working.
hopefully gonna release LiquidGen
Yeah, eventually, one of these days.
in hey, it says spring 2024, man.
Yeah,
I'm
somebody just
holding their
asked.
feet to the fire.
Yeah, and they said soon. They were like, it's gonna be soon. Let me turn this way down because I'm trying to live stream, and I believe this will use up like, oops, I don't want to do that. I guess as much of
Your
our
whole computer.
it will use as much as we give it. So I
Okay.
believe, and I think there is a way I can view the stats. Rendering. Oh, here we go. That's fine. Quality, medium. Turn that to low, and then view stats. Okay, so we're not using too much right now because I dropped everything down.
It's
But
definitely dropping frames on my end, which could also be my
okay,
network, but it's funny because have the live stream up on another screen just in case, and I can see what's going on there, so it's great.
it looks like that's
Got my
also
bases
perhaps
covered.
dropping slaves or frames. So let's see. We have we're in the island, right? So the lab is probably going to be somewhere like over here. Obviously this is very very daylight right now, but if
Hmm.
we were to turn this, drop the elevation way 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 down.
Azimuth? What on earth is?
It's just a technical phrase for how where it is rotating around the
Oh,
Earth.
okay, okay,
Yeah, and then elevation is more obvious.
yeah.
Um, but so anyway, so I think the sky is the problem. There we go. So we have a shot towards the end where you can see the floating island, uh, and it's gonna be like something like that, and then we'll have some smoke coming up here from where the um lab is. Yeah, I'm definitely dropping frames. Can I stop this from rendering? I don't think I can pause it. Not that I'm aware of at the moment. I'm sure the Django team is like, yeah, there is. You just hit this button. Toggle. Uh, I'm just gonna exit it, I think. Let me do this. And then exit.
Take a screenshot of
Oh,
it.
save. Yeah. And then, oh, where's my screenshots? Can I see those, please? Oh, normally it shows up, but whatever. Anyway, so you get the idea.
Yeah.
So that's a super sneak peek, but the goal is to have that be. I've played around with that a little bit, and so
Hmm.
and part of the reason why I played around with that is so that way we could hopefully do some tutorials around that. And for anyone that tunes in between now and next week, that I have a little sneak peek for that as well, which is more Jenga effects, and this is what our viewers want. What they want is more tutorials, so that's what we're going to give them. And next week, sometime, maybe at the very end of the week, we're going to get probably one of our coolest tutorials yet. which is a fire-breathing dragon. So that's pretty hard to beat as far as I'm concerned. So that's everything we got up to in the first week of January. So that's pretty cool that we've started the year off and already have a new tutorial coming. We have progress on the short and playing with new software for you guys. All right, so that's me getting everything out all at once. Any further questions, Rob? Anything you think our audience needs to know?
I mean, I
Happy New
always have
Year.
further questions. I could pretty much ask you about everything and just make you do like a teaching function
I know.
seminar on the systems we use.
Yeah,
But
yeah. For some reason, when I went back to my film school and offered to teach and to even just for free do talks, they're like, "Yeah, we're booked up, and you don't have a master's degree, so technically you're not allowed to teach." I'm like, "Bull crap, guys. Bull
yeah,
crap."
that's always interesting stuff
And
that
that's
go
where
along with that.
my like inner bender kicks in, and it's like, I'm gonna start my own school with blackjack and hookers. Like, that's how. Then that's where Royals and Rogues came from. Is like really is like nobody else wants to have me teach them how to make this stuff, and then I'll do it myself.
Pretty much. I mean, that's usually how it goes with the tutorials anyways online is you're actually learning from people doing it. So now you're going, oh yeah, this is actually really useful for me.
I had a class
Well,
where we were learning this new software, and the teacher was like just as new to it, all of us. And like before class every week, he would come to me and be like, "So what have you learned this week? Like, how did you figure this out?" I'm like, "Well, I have this working, but like, I don't really know how to do that." And he's like, "Oh, interesting." He's like, "I was working on this." I'm like, "Oh, I actually saw something for that. Here's how you do that." And he's like, "Oh, cool, thanks." And then he like teaches it the class. I'm like, "Wait a second, I'm paying for this class."
yeah, yeah, there's always that little thing in the back of your mind where you're just like, I don't know. Like I remember my professors being all pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Um and uh kind of understanding, but there was always this type of thing too where it's like I'd worked on some of their films and I didn't like it wasn't that they were bad, but there was nothing that made them that stood out, which
Right.
is kind of tough to like gauge on when you actually like there is this point like I'm pretty critical when it comes to Hollywood films.
Mm-hmm.
But I know enough to know that like, it's difficult. It is difficult to make something, um, especially at that level where the person who holds the purse strings isn't necessarily going to be controlling, or doing hands-on for everything else.
Right.
Which I do think can cause issues. Like to coordinate all that is pretty tough. Um, but there is this it's still this thing where you're like, yeah, but like there's a lot of mediocre stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as like so I there is this point where it's like because I'm like, here's a great example. I'm heavily critical of iRobot. I will always bring it up. I
Mm-hmm.
love because I enjoy the movie,
Right.
but I always look at it and I'm like, there are so many different movies within this that could have been done,
Mm-hmm.
or just with this one movie, you could have done a couple things to change it and it would have been better. But you have no idea at the end of the day if the director and the actors and the cinematographer and everybody sat down, they're like, this is what we want to do. But then you had one executive producer come in and say, no,
Right.
I want it to look like this. And it's like, well, this is my boss. I have to do what my boss says. And there's a plenty of people out there who think they know what they're doing. You're like, you don't. Like that is probably my biggest flaw is that I probably still think I know more than I do, and I need to get to the point where you kind of start going down. You're like, yeah, never mind. I'm not really sure how to do
Yeah.
that, but I do know my limit. I do understand. I do have limitations and where those are at. Uh, but yeah, it is tough then when you see people or you'll see people online who say stuff and you're like, nah, it's not correct. Like that is just not how that works.
Yeah,
So
it's really hard when something becomes a popular idea online, and I've noticed this happening a lot, and we'll see. I need to make a video. This might be a discussion for our next Friday, or it might be a video I make at some point just during the week. But there's these different like uh I'll call them like bumper stickers, right? Like that come about, and then somebody relies on that bumper sticker rather than an argument. So like, I run into this more and more in real life where I'll be talking to somebody and they'll make a point, and I'll be like, "Oh, I saw that tweet." Will be my response to their point, isn't, and it's the most like it's so great it crushes them because they think they're making this brilliant point that they're like, oh well, this thing, and you're like, yeah, I saw that tweet, or I watched John Oliver too, right? And then they're like, oh wait, I thought, so. And what's funny about it is, like one of these things is like, is AI bad or like NFTs bad, right? So I'll see all these people being like, NFTs are just a scam or whatever. And I saw somebody recently that was a fellow like digital short filmmaker who made a very popular film, and then he asked his audience like, should I go through all this work to start a business in another country because his country doesn't support Kickstarter, or Kickstarter doesn't support his country, I should say, um, and or should I just like start? Should I just make not just make an NFT, but or should I make this an NFT project, which allows you guys to all own a piece of it without me necessarily having to create a formal company, right? But there is like a sort of digital contract there, and then
Yeah.
he's done work with a legitimate NFT project, like a very very legitimate NFT project, and but all the audience, all the sentiment is just like, it's all scams. I don't want it. Please don't do that. Please don't do an NFT. NFTs are just scams. It's like, you don't even know what you're saying. It's like saying like, um, it's sort of like the CGI bad crowd, or like the, whatever it is that sort of takes over the internet and then becomes this go-to catchphrase. And the one that I'll probably end up making a video on is the whole like go woke, go broke catchphrase, which is a cool bumper sticker. And this is a bumper sticker I actually want to make, which is like, good bumper stickers make bad policy, right? It's like it's a good as a bumper sticker because you only have like two, one little sentence, and it has to be big enough to read, but it makes a horrible policy because it's way too broad, and there's no nuance to it, and it actually probably is not really applicable to like most scenarios. But the fact is, it's a fun thing that sounds good that you can sort of rattle off, which is like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's like, okay, what does that even mean? Or what he doesn't know can't hurt him. And it's like, that's never true. It's never true that what you does, usually what hurts you is what you don't know. If you knew about it, you would avoid it, right? Like that's the whole thing. But we get these phrases, and then especially when they're going through like this zeitgeist, there's just this sort of like momentum behind a concept that then you have to like fight against. And so like that's really hard too, I think. And I had a way this tied into what you were saying, and I think I kind of totally lost it somewhere along that
You lost the
explanation.
plot.
Yeah, because go back to what you were talking about. You're talking about how somebody comes in and potentially ruins something that you kind of find mediocre, so you have to be careful about why it's mediocre.
Well, it's the it's kind of the idea that knowledge. I know people talk about it like the Dunning-Kruger effect, but I think it's
Right.
more of like people like to
That's what it was.
form
Yep.
and understand ideas like, oh well, this is what they need to do to fix it, or so on and so forth. Like, oh, if all they had to do was change this, it's like, well,
That's so yeah. That's
if
how
you've
that's
worked
how
in
it
if
tied
you've
in. Yeah.
worked in any organization, you understand there's people you have to answer to,
Right.
and sometimes those people think that they know what they're talking about. Sometimes they do, but sometimes it doesn't get communicated down. Like, I'm sure that there are executives at my full-time job that know what they're doing, but I'm sure there's executives who don't know exactly how my department works,
Mm-hmm.
so they can say, like, a great example is we needed metrics, like we had to uh pay a government fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a bank, so it happens
Right.
all the time. We had to get that complete. And this was a bit before my time. The fine itself was assessed in 2020. My
Right.
department was created in response to that assessment. The fine didn't have to get paid until 2023,
Mm-hmm.
last year. And
Right.
the problem is once we paid it, it was like the executives were like, well, we want to make sure this doesn't happen again. So like I want to see like the statistics of like what's going on. Like, give us some reports on where we're at, how quickly are we closing cases, blah blah blah. So all of a sudden, everything in our department changes. Like, we just stop, full stop. It's like, all right, we're gonna gear everything towards this. Well, what happened was we had full-time employees and we had contractors, and contractors worked one type of case,
Mm-hmm.
full-time employees worked the other one. It slowed down, so we didn't have enough cases for the full-time employees. They refused to let us work on the ones that were contractor worked, because even though the contractors were getting flooded and had way more cases than, like, they could get through the cases, but it's like they still had a lot. We could have easily taken them. It would have screwed up the reporting.
Right.
And the people who were my managers and middle management would didn't want to go to executives and be like, hey, like this really screws up our reporting though. We can't then show you. Eventually it got to the point where the senior leaders were just like, we don't care about the reporting. Like, no, like that doesn't matter. Just get the work done.
Right.
And so you have this, but we're talking about a period of months.
Right.
And this is a highly like built out procedure on how you do cases. Like it's a huge library of information. So
Yeah.
then now take that and put it on a film or a TV show where you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. The whole like, yes, you can plan everything out, but
Right.
the whole saying is you hope for the hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. And
Right.
that's what every film set I've ever been on has been. Is we're gonna plan everything out to a crazy degree, but the minute that we get there, you make contact with the enemy, and you're just
Right.
gonna like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
No plan
this light
survives
went out.
contact with the enemy. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, hey, that light bulb just went out, and
Hmm.
it turns out we need two of them, but we only have one. Like, oh crap, what are we gonna do now?
Right.
That type of thing. Like something's going to happen, or it rains that day when it wasn't supposed to, or something. So I always see that aspect of it, and I think a lot of people ignore that when we're talking. At the same time, there's a lot of bad films out there too,
Well, so
and you do
yeah.
kind of look at them and you're like, how was this made? Like this shouldn't have gotten a green light, and and there's plenty of you can see plenty of things and go, this like you could tell from the beginning this was flawed. Like the
Right.
script wasn't even good.
Well,
So
there's like there's multiple things to go off of here. So like the first one is the hardest thing I think to get any business or film or venture on is a unified vision and like having a common why. So like, why are we doing this? Why is this the way it is? And I always say start with why before how. And so when something's trying to serve too many whys, that's where it becomes like a mess. And so um, I think sort of the best whys are the ones that sort of are the highest, right? Like, everything is in subservience to I'm trying to tell the truth about this thing, right? Whatever it is. And so what happens is you get somebody else that has a different why. So like why like and this is my problem sort of with Disney and Hollywood in general, which is like if you ask them, or invest, this is also why I really hate anything going public because the why suddenly changes. So let's say you have your Tom's shoes or something, right? You're anything in the world. It's like, well, why do you want to do this? And almost always it's some great altruistic thing. It's like, well, I wanted to put shoes on people's feet that can't afford shoes or something like that, right? Or I wanted to have sustainable, cheap footwear, right? That's also comfortable. Okay, that's a good why. And then everything's in service to that. So like the profitability of the company, but then as soon as a company goes public, all of a sudden the whys by law are whatever's in our shareholders' best interest. And you have to. Ford tried to pay his employees more when they made a large profit, and he got sued by his shareholders. And he was like, well, me taking these profits and increasing salaries will actually make the company more successful in the long run. That's always been his bet, was investing back into his people so those people could spend money on his products, right? And then they were sued. He was sued. The Supreme Court looked at it and said, no, your obligation is not to make your employees' lives better. Your obligation is not to run even a good company. Your obligation is to your shareholders, and you're supposed to make them the most money or whatever they see fit. If they see that is what they should be, they're investing in you because of, then that's fine. But otherwise, you have a shareholder obligation. So no, you have to cut your employee salary and pay that to shareholders. And so that sets the precedent that like, okay, well now my why isn't to make the best vehicle, to send people to space, to whatever. It suddenly becomes to make people money. Right. And if you're a hospital, like you get made and then you become a hospital, usually because everyone that's a doctor isn't just like, hopefully, I just want to be rich. It's like, that's a good byproduct, but it's like, I want to make people well. And a hospital exists to make people healthy. But then you get investors, you get people buying into it, and they don't care about any of it. They don't even see any of the bottom line, right? Their whole goal. And so, and I think that's sort of what's happened with a lot of companies, but including Disney, is like the bottom line hasn't become to tell a good story. It's like to have a place to like sort of gas off money. It's sort of a place to, to have vanity projects. It's a place to kind of show how good or moral or whatever I am. And it's suddenly movies have not become about, well, I have this great story and I really want to tell it. Instead, it's become, well, I have a demand for this product and I want you to make it. And so that's where you get something like an Obi-Wan where it's like nobody has the story ready to go. No one's been dying. It hasn't been being optioned for years. And then someone's like, "Oh, I found this perfect script that you think you're going to love." It's like, "Hey, we need an Obi-Wan movie. You six writers make one." And then the six writers why is, well,
Yeah.
I want to win awards, I want to look good. And then the why of the studio is like we want to make a ton of money, and we just need content for our streaming service. So even if it's not the best, we're not going to like delay it a year, because the why isn't make the best movie ever. The why is I need a something to fill this empty square on my app, right? So it's like that's where you get so many of these conflicting whys. And that's what you're saying is like, you don't know when someone's why is going to come in and ruin your why. And with the best films are things like that we all love, where everyone's why is sort of aligned. It's like, and that's why all these surprising films happen, where it's like Godzilla or something like this, where you're like, how did Star Wars or Godzilla or whatever get made when they didn't have all this budget? They didn't have, it's like, because they
Yeah.
had a very unified why. Like everyone was in it to make that thing.
Well,
And so
there
when that happens, I'll wrap up here real quick. When that happens, it sort of happens because there's no like boss with a ton of money, right? It sort of happens because everyone's like, well, we're just doing this because we love it, like because that's why it's happening, and then that allows you to be more unified.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do think there's far more companies incorporate far too quickly and
Yeah,
easily, and it doesn't
yeah,
make sense to do it.
no.
But I think that it's also more of a
I think the only companies that should really, I don't think anyone should go public, frankly. I think it's the first death of a company. But if you do go public, it should be like a Coca-Cola, where this thing runs on its own, right? Like this
yeah,
thing's running, this thing has figured it all out. The idea of like going public for like a venture capital type deal, like, you know what I mean? Or 3 years into your business is just mind blowing to me that you have like
yeah, no,
a Lyft or an Uber that like is still very much so in like a nascent, like any law could change and destroy the whole business, and everyone's like, oh, I'm buying into that, and you're like, that's a horrible idea. And I don't, there's no guarantee of profitability in 10 years, which is the whole point of putting your money in the market. Isn't to gamble supposedly, but which is why we like try to stop insider trading. Like the whole reason is like, no, we're not gambling, it's an investment. And then it's like, what are we investing in? It's like, well, all these things that are literally just slot machines, being like, well, we're profitable now, or we'll be profitable in 6 months when you sell. So
yeah, it's always a little iffy with that. But I think coming back to just art in general, though, it's a little bit different too, though, because it's not just necessarily like the why. Like I don't think anyone went into Obi-Wan saying, writing for it, like I want to win awards. Like I think they do want that. I don't think they want to do it with that property. Like I don't think that's. I think what they want to do is write their own stories, um, and make that
well,
what they
yeah,
win
yeah,
awards
yeah.
off of.
I'm
But those are
let
going to be
me,
like indie films and stuff like that. But I
yeah.
I I do think that's important though because
No, I think you are correct. I don't. What I mean by that isn't the literal they're writing it to win, but they just have a
yeah,
different why, right? Than the producers. So
yeah.
like it's probably more accurate, and I think you're right. I think generally people are more self like, I just want to tell this story, and oh, I get the opportunity to tell it through Obi-Wan. Then cool, I'm going to tell the story I've always wanted to tell, but just using Obi-Wan as a shell, or Halo as a shell, or whatever as the means of getting the story I want to tell out.
Well, I do think though that it is also important that part of that comes from the where you're at. Like if you go to Disney, because you're right, Disney's huge. If you go to Disney to be a writer, or you're going to these big studios, that is it's like working for a big bank,
Right.
um, and or for a big corporation. You don't go into that if you're a risk taker.
Mm-hmm.
You are not you're not going to go out on a limb. You are very much, you prefer safety and security of like the idea of like a consistent paycheck and so forth, which is fine. But if you look back at most of the entertainment companies, when they started, they were not stable places.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean by like just the people or anything. I just mean that you rose and there's a lot of rise and fall.
Right.
The big three for automobiles, there used to be thousands of automobile companies.
Right.
It was highly competitive. There were a lot of small ones. And I think that's the same thing. If you look at Disney alone, look at the types of films that they are making now as opposed to what they were making back in the 90s and even before then. Because the 90s, we talk about like there was a renaissance of
Mm-hmm.
the films. But really, if you look back, like Disney was in dire straits a lot of. throughout the
Right.
decade or throughout the century. And I think what makes it interesting is that early on, there was a lot of creativity. It was a lot of risk taking. They were making things that were new. I mean, they were adapting. And this is something that I I was thinking about the other day. They were adapting fairy tales for children in a medium that wasn't really used all that much for children. Cartoons really weren't. They were a lot more
Right.
adult focused and oriented back then, or back when they were being used in the early 20th century.
Hmm.
But they haven't done that anymore. Like if you look at the stories that they do now, the stories that like even with Pixar and all that stuff, like some of them are very rude. Like what was it? The Lion King is Hamlet.
Right.
Or they would just take Grimm's fairy tales and they would just put those into a childlike, a format that's safe for children. I guess I don't know about safe for children, but is geared towards children.
Yeah, digestible
Um,
by children. Yeah.
yeah, but when was the last time they did that? Like that doesn't take a ton of creativity, but it is a risk that you're taking technically. But I was thinking about it. I'm like, I can't remember the last time they were doing something new.
Hmm.
Like they definitely dove into the live action for all the fairy tales, but like I can't remember the last time like
I
the
think
Little Mermaid
Rapunzel was
or
probably, as far as I can tell,
maybe,
that's a fairy tale that
and that
then
was
was
Tangled.
adapted.
Yeah,
Tangled.
I
Yeah.
think that's the Rapunzel
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
even
Yeah. Yeah.
then,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you go back and watch that, and it's not really the same as what you would get from the Little Mermaid in the 90s. Like it very much is more of
Yeah.
the progressive type mentality and
Yeah.
view, which is
I like
fine. But
Tangled. I think Tangled isn't bad. I think uh with every film there's something I say which is like I wish more people just like gave people like an envelope full of money when they had a good idea. Um and I went back and forth on this one, but I thought the horse was like the best part of that whole thing. I like the horse character, but then I thought about it. I was like, but that's also every horse in every Disney. Like sassy horses is a Disney thing. Like whether you get some the Mulan horse, I don't know the name of the horses, so but like the Tangled horse, like the Captain Phoebus, Achilles, right? Like every horse in the Disney movie is just this like sassy, like snapback sort of or clapback sort of like horse and you're like what? I guess horses are sassy um and I guess that's kind of true that most horses sort of have a sassy attitude if you've ever been around them um but yeah it's there is Rapunzel. I think I'm sure people would correct me, like obviously Moana has a story, like a history to it that they're
mhm.
drawing from. um I don't know if there's like a book called Moana necessarily, but I think
Yeah,
it's sort of like Hercules, I gotta believe, where it's like Hercules is sort of like one mythology. And what's funny is what's interesting though is what we're listing are the most successful, most recent ones. So like
yeah.
Moana's done, but the Ice Princess would be Frozen, right? Like,
Was
um,
it? So that's just it. Like
or Snow
so I've never
Queen.
seen Frozen,
Uh,
but I never got that feel from it. It always seemed like, oh, this is kind of taking inspiration, but it just went a completely different direction.
yeah, um, yeah. I think the biggest thing for me with new Disney, and I'm not a kid, and I'm not watching a lot of them, so like, I take all this with a huge grain of salt because it's not like I do get when people are like, some 30-year-old dude complaining that like Disney isn't for him anymore, and it's like, yeah, that's a bit cringe, and I think I see that side of it, like, and you know, I don't really need it to be for me, and I don't really care to watch it. But that being said, I think my general statement is it's bad because it's bad, right? Like I don't know if it's bad because they're
Yeah,
not relying on storytelling or they're not relying on like, this thing or that thing. I think it's bad because it's not good. And that sounds like a stupid definition of bad. It's a very like self-referential. Um but what I mean by that is, and you would agree with this, is like it's missing so many fundamental elements of good storytelling, of risk, like you said, of interest, of things we haven't seen before, or things done in a way that's just so professional that we can't help but love it. And instead, it's sort of relying on all the sort of codified elements to succeed. And you're like, what are you bringing here that I haven't seen before, or that is done in a way that's better than it's been done in the past? And it just doesn't feel like there's sort of that magic. And I don't know. I'd have to go back and like see what the sentiment was at the time, back in the day of certain things, because I like a lot of classic Disney, but like I knew people that when Mulan came out were like, "Oh, this is the end of Disney because it's like it's not based
Well,
on like a story and it's like
but
this like set,
that's what I mean is like we say that, but
And I mean the original Mulan, not like the
I
new
know.
the new Chinese propaganda Mulan.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I mean is like when did the original Mulan come out? 1998.
Is that when it
This
came
is
out?
Yeah, it came out in 1998. And it's not that they haven't been doing stuff what we would consider recently, but for us, we were alive then. We were watching those. It's like if you think of it now, like I mean, they've had good fit. Like Ratatouille came out. That's a great movie. That's 2007.
Yeah, it is
Like
weird to
that's
think
not
about how
recent.
how long ago a lot of this stuff was.
Up 2009.
Yikes.
We still talk about it, but most of the time, kids today aren't going to be like my brother's,
Hmm.
kids and my sister's kids. They're not going to be watching those unless they actively, my parents or my their
Yeah,
parents
their
are
parents.
actively saying, "Hey, we want you to watch this." Tangle was 2010. Like it's over a decade, 13 years. I couldn't really. It didn't really matter because, and that's true too. Is like think of the movies that we grew up with. We watched all of the old classics. So yes,
Right.
the cream definitely rises to the top. But just looking at like the movies that they're going to be coming out with this year, it was like let's see. They did or upcoming ones are going to be Inside Out 2, Snow White, and Moana, which are both live actions of films they've already done. And they got Mufasa the Lion King,
The
which I don't know
Moana,
what that.
the Moana live action. When did Moana come out? I guess like 7 or 8 years ago now.
Yeah, but they're doing Mufasa the Lion King. It's like I
It's a prequel.
I
Mufasa.
guess so.
It's got to be a prequel, right? Or he's
I
just like a
think so.
ghost haunting
It's
everyone.
intended to be the live action style. This is what I'm reading right now.
Okay.
Photorealistic computer generated imagery prequel
Hmm.
to The Lion King. It's like I really like that's it. Like you could do you could do so many things. Like they've done like Alice in Wonderland. That's not actually a children's like thing,
Yeah.
but that was a great movie that they did years ago. I'm not talking the live action. I'm talking about the original
Hmm.
animated. Like just kind of going through that in my brain, I'm thinking there's it's the same thing. Lightyear was a bomb. And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, because this isn't really what we're looking for. And so I think that's part of it is that you can hire a bunch of people and you can have a ton of money and you can do a ton of stuff. But at the end of the day, like you're not people who are willing to take risks. And there's a lot of people that have to give say so. And that's not really what you do when you're trying to make something transcendent. Like I can't think of anything that comes transcendent from such a large group or
Yeah, and I
a
and I
company like that.
I think you're right, and I think there's solutions to that, but no one wants those solutions, right? Like a solution to that would be as a studio to take like a massive hands-off approach, right? To like really step back and give someone a few people the reins to feel. And I think we kind of got that a little bit with like the first season of Mando. I sort of got the idea, and I could be completely wrong. I don't really haven't followed like its development, but I sort of feel like before they knew it was a success, that they kind of had kind of complete creative freedom. It was just like, hey, do whatever you want. And someone had this cool story. They're like, oh, I really want to make a Western, but set in like the Star Wars universe following a bounty hunter, right? Like that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
And then there's all this lore built up about the Mandalorian. So like that's going to be really, really fun to do. And they just nailed it. And they nailed the idea of making a Western in a Star Wars film or Star Wars universe. And um, sort of like how Rogue One is like a dirty dozen of the Star Wars universe, right? And it's like this is just a fun thing to do. And you sort of get the idea of these like lesser, like the stakes aren't very high, and they didn't really put like a lot of like attention on it. And those are the ones that like did super great, and at least amongst people that I have taste, were considered the best stuff they made. And it's one of those things that's interesting because um, it's sort of like these giant corporations can now and then like poop out a gem, but it's mostly by accident, right? Because like
Yeah.
they're not paying attention, and then someone's got in the way with sort of doing this. And what's interesting is like you're talking about risk taking. It's like there's a bunch of new technologies that you're playing with on that. There are new stuff. Or like, what if we do like this whole thing where the actors are actually in an environment, it's all properly lit, but they also kind of feel like they're in it because it's 360 screens and so all that was like a super fun thing that I think I get this gut feeling. I don't know if I'm right about it, but I get this gut feeling like it was kind of flying under the radar. They're like, yeah, we'll give you like a few $1 million or whatever, because everything gets a few $1 million these days, and we'll let you like go with it for a while and see what happens. And then like they release it onto Disney Plus. It's not like, well, we're making a big movie about this. It's like, and then they figured out like, oh, and I think before they released it, they kind of knew, given the hype they built around, like we got something pretty cool here. Um, but I doubt that was how it started. I doubt it started like,
Yeah.
dude, this is going to be the next biggest property we have, right? It was like, and then that's going to spin off into other property. Like Ahsoka was never planned until Mandalorian did so well, and then it was like,
Yeah.
now we got to spin off all these other things, and then those things have like the Eye of Sauron on it, right? Being like, well, it has to have this character, and it has to have these call outs, and it has to tie into these 6 things, and you're like, ugh, now you've ruined it. It was better when
You
you
know,
weren't looking at it and you didn't know someone was making something cool.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting how it all kind of goes along with that. It was similar to I watched the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem
Oh
a
yeah.
couple months back.
You
And
have
my
you're
sister
this like glutton for punishment. Somehow you're watching every single thing that I'm like so done with
So
before
here's
it's
the
even
thing.
come out,
My
and
younger
you're
sister
like, I
kept saying
watched
like
this, and I'm like, what are you watching
my
over there?
I think I learn a lot from what I consider bad movies.
Yeah,
Uh
I I just like
but
to learn from the good movies.
yeah, well, you also
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
not
I'm kidding.
going we're not going
I
into
like
this.
all sorts of trash. But go on.
My sister really was like, "Oh, it's good. I really loved it. It was really great." I was like, "Okay, like I don't really trust my I don't really trust a lot of people's opinions on movies, like immediate family or
Yeah.
anything, but they're not terrible. It's just like they're kind of,
Mhm.
normal about it.
I
Like
go
they're
back and
not super
forth on
into
that.
it.
I'm
But
very happy that there's people out there who like just love things that are mediocre because it means like they'll like my work. Like it's like, oh, it's good. I liked it, and you're like, cool, that's fun. So I'm glad not everyone's like a snob like me and you, but
yeah.
um,
So here's the thing though. It wasn't that bad.
mhm,
It just had enough things in it that made me not want to watch anymore. And if and I know they're going to come out with a sequel, and I'm
right,
probably not going to see it because like the character, what they did to the character of Splinter and April O'Neil
mhm,
and like some of the turtles, it was just like this is just kind of annoying.
right,
Like you like really ruined the character of Splinter, and you're just like it's just isn't. It's not for me.
yeah.
I don't really see it being something I'd watch on repeat. And in fact, what I ended up doing is I went and watched all the Ninja Turtle movies that I did like,
And you
and I
finally
was like,
realized how horrible they all are.
dude, they're so good. They're so good.
They're so
They
bad.
are so good.
That's like the ultimate like rose tinted glasses watch.
No, the first one is actually a good movie.
Go
Okay,
ninja,
I
go
can't.
ninja,
Okay,
go ninja, go
well,
ninja, go.
that's the second one. That's the second one. The first one is actually
Vanilla Ice having a
pretty
ninja
good.
rap.
The second one with Super Shredder and all that is a bit, yeah, that's a bit
Super
something.
Shredder, and he gets
That's a bit something.
the
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 third one is
whole
bad. I did not like the third one.
the whole origin of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is completely like a tongue-in-cheek, ironic thing. It's making fun of Daredevil, which is why
Yeah, yeah,
they're the
yeah.
foot versus the hand, and they get the ooze, which is the same ooze that got Daredevil. They're in the sewer below, and he has Stick as his master, and they have Splinter. So
Yeah,
it's all like this ironic, funny, weird thing that was darker than it needed to be, just because there's two guys in their basement, just being like, well, not even their basement. They're just in like a little like they would hand paper back and forth to draw the next scene.
yeah.
Um, and it's just so funny because like this is what always gets me about like the online like critic culture. It's like they they're often not wrong, but at the same time, like this is why there's always someone that can come up with like oh well there was this thing back in the day that wasn't that way. April O'Neil, whatever, at one point had a perm or something, but it's just kind of funny because like there's this whole like history and then it becomes something else, and then you like look back and it's like, hey, could you imagine telling like those two dudes just like drawing and they're like, oh, we're making this fun ironic comic that like one day people will be debating like whether or not this like 18th movie made off of your property is like cool or not. Like you'd be
Well,
like, what? I just sat there and drew this thing
yeah, like
just for
I get
kicks.
that. I also see it from the other perspective where you could go back on just about any property
Oh yeah.
and be like, hey, in the future, we're gonna say that we need to race swap or we need to gender
Well,
swap
yeah.
these characters,
Imagine
and they kind of
telling
look at you and be like, what? What? Well, who
Why?
cares?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly,
why?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, why? Who
that
cares?
doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's what's funny about that argument too. Is like that argument's such like a non-starter for me. It's just like somebody goes like, "Oh, they race up this character and I don't like it," and then someone goes like, "Well, why do you care? It's just a story." And then like the response back is, "Well, then if that's the case, why do you care?" It's just like like there's this it's just this like
It's a circular thing where
cyclical
it's like,
argument that
I
like
don't
you
think that.
that just doesn't go anywhere. And for me, my question is like, is it good? Because nobody has a problem. Nobody has a problem with Nick Fury. Nobody's like, oh, Nick Fury was race swapped and I hate it. Everyone loves Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury.
Yeah.
He does a good Nick Fury. It's a fun character. Um, and no one's like, oh, he's not the brown-haired white guy with a gray streak, through his hair, which pretty much
Yeah.
looks exactly like Mr. Marvel, right? From Mr. Right Marvel from the Stretchy Man, who's Fantastic Four, not
Oh,
Mr. Marvel,
okay, yeah.
Mr. Fantastic,
Mr. Fantastic.
Mr. Fantastic.
Yeah. Reed Richards.
Reed Richards, that's his name. Reed Richards. He looks just like Reed Richards. You're like, so you knew how to draw like one character, um, but
Wasn't he played by David Hasselhoff in something?
oh, I have no idea. I don't even want to know.
I might be making that up.
But so yeah, and I think it was the Howling Commandos is where is the original origin of Nick Fury, which is like one of the first like Marvel comics. But anyway, so you're like, okay, so this is what your view as a leader. Like that's what a leader looks like. He looks like a guy with gray streak and an eye patch, which I kind of agree with. I wish I had a gray streak and an eye patch, but you have to earn them like naturally. You can't like you can't just start wearing an eye patch. That's lame. But if you like go to save a kid and like from a mugger and he stabs your eye, like that's pretty cool. But the yeah, so anyway, so that all is circular to me. It's not like essential, but I think it gets back to like our point, which is like and why I think any of this matters to talk about is like, if you're an independent artist, you have a bunch of advantages. And one of the cool advantages you have is you can take the risks that other people aren't. And you can play with the new technology that the pipeline just doesn't allow for at other places. Like you were saying with like, oh, well, we can't let freelancers or full-time employee work on freelance projects, or we can't do this, we can't do that. It's like, you don't have that on you. So like lean into it. Like lean into your strengths of being able to take risks, being able to not have to worry as much about offending people. Don't worry so much about having to appeal to a mass audience. Find some niche that likes one in particular thing.
Change things up.
Yeah, change
if you're
things
like,
up.
I don't know if this is working. Let's try something different. Or
right, you have the
pivot,
ability
or like,
to pivot.
oh, this I
right.
like doing this type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, use that new
being really
technology
fluid.
that like they don't have worked into their workflow because they're still using Maya, 2004 or whatever for their workflow, and you have the ability to lean into something like an Embergen or a GeoGen or a Move AI or something like that. Like lean into that. So I think that's a good
sounds good.
note to wrap on.
I agree.
I doubt anyone will watch this far. And Rob always goes, stop saying that. But
yeah, well, that's like literally we just like, feel free to like, you got tons of freedom. Do whatever you want, dude. You're gonna make it. Yeah, you can do it. No one's getting. And then you're like, I'm so sorry, everybody.
I didn't apologize.
This is just bad.
I didn't apologize. But I do think we're gonna change up the format perhaps next week, and we'll see how that goes. And I think it'll be exciting. I think it'll be really fun. That's part of pivoting because you're small and can do it. So.
Sounds good, man. Let's leave it at that and
right.
end the stream, and I will see you next week.
All right. See ya, folks. End stream.
I really hope you said end.